at 9:17 on the morning of January 22, 1943. Second Lieutenant John George crouched in the ruins of a Japanese bunker west of Point Cruz, watching a banyan tree 240 yards away. Through his scope, his fellow officers had laughed at for 6 weeks. At 27, George was an Illinois state champion marksman with 0 confirmed kills. The Japanese had 11 snipers operating in the Point Cruz groves, and in the past 72 hours, they had killed 14 men from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. His commanding officer had called his rifle a toy. The other platoon leaders mocked it as his mail-order sweetheart. When George unpacked the Winchester Model 70 with its Lyman Alaskan scope and Griffin and Hal, a mount at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the armorer asked if it was meant for deer or Germans. George explained it was for the Japanese. By then, his unit had shipped out, leaving his rifle behind. He spent the voyage to Guadalcanal watching other men clean their garans, while his own weapon sat in a warehouse in Illinois. 6 weeks later, in late December of 1942, a supply sergeant handed him a wooden crate marked "Fragile." Inside was the rifle he had saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy. The rifle weighed 9 pounds. The scope added another 12 ounces. By contrast, the Garand issued to every other man in his battalion weighed 9.5 pounds with no magnification. George's rifle was bolt section, 5 rounds. The Garand was semi-automatic. 8 rounds. Captain Morris ordered him to leave the sporting rifle in his tent and carry a real weapon. George carried it anyway. By late December, the 132nd Infantry had relieved the Marines on Guadalcanal. The Marines had fought since August. They had taken Henderson Field, held it, but had not cleared Mount Austin or the Japanese from the coastal groves west of the Matanuca. And now, George was ready to face the deadliest challenge of his life. The morning air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your skin and made every movement sticky and slow. George moved carefully through the ruins, the weight of his bolt-action rifle steady in his hands. Each step was measured, deliberate. The banyan tree he had been watching was no longer just a tree. It was a hiding place, a nest of danger. Somewhere among its roots and branches lurked a Japanese sniper, trained to kill, patient and invisible. The first shot came unexpectedly. A bullet zipped past the corner of his bunker, splintering a wooden beam with a sharp crack. George froze, heart hammering. The other men might have panicked, but he simply adjusted his scope, measured the distance, and held his breath. He had trained for this, not just in competitions back home, but mentally, imagining scenarios where calm and precision meant survival. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Time seemed to stretch. Then movement, a glint of metal on a branch. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil was familiar, comforting in a strange way. The Japanese sniper went down, eyes wide with shock. Relief washed over George, but there was no time to celebrate. There were 10 more snipers, each as deadly as the first, each potentially watching his every move. Over the next 2 days, George honed his method. He learned to use the terrain, the shadows of fallen trees, the gaps between the jungle undergrowth, the uneven ridges of the ruins. He moved slowly, silently, calculating every step. He discovered patterns in the Japanese snipers' movements, when they changed positions, where they liked to hide, how they reacted to sound. Patience became his ally. The platoon began to notice. Men who had mocked the mail-order rifle now whispered about George with a mix of disbelief and awe. "Did you see him out there yesterday?" one soldier would ask. "He doesn't just shoot. He disappears afterward. It's like the jungle itself is hiding him." George's first full-day encounter ended with 3 more snipers down and a growing sense of disbelief among the enemy. Rumors began to spread through the Japanese lines. An American sniper who was not just accurate, but cunning. almost untouchable. Yet for George, there was no pride, only focus. Each kill had to be precise. One mistake, one twitch, could mean death. Night brought no rest. The sounds of the jungle were a constant reminder. Distant gunfire, rustling leaves, the occasional shout from a patrolling soldier. He cleaned his rifle carefully under the dim light, checked the scope, and studied the map. 4 more snipers remained. 4 more lives between him and the end of this deadly hunt. By the 3rd day, George had become a shadow. He moved without sound, breathed without thought, his eyes scanning for the smallest sign of movement. The enemy had grown wary. Patrols became cautious. Snipers repositioned, but George adapted. Every shot he fired was a calculated strike. A deadly chess move in a war of patience, precision, and nerves. By the end of the 4th day, 11 Japanese snipers lay dead. Each one a testament to skill, calm under pressure, and the surprising lethality of a toy rifle in the hands of a determined man. Word of his exploits began to spread, first among the platoon, then across the regiment. The ridicule that had greeted his rifle when he unpacked it in Tennessee was gone, replaced by awe and grudging respect. George had become a force to be reckoned with, a ghost in the Guadalcanal groves. The sun had just begun to pierce the dense jungle canopy when George spotted him. Not a flicker of movement, not a glint in the underbrush, only a shadow, a faint outline against the thick green foliage. He knew immediately this was no ordinary sniper. The others had been skilled, yes, but this one moved with precision, patience, and a predator's awareness. The final adversary. The one who had killed more of his comrades than any other. George's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He crouched low, adjusting the Lyman Alaskan scope, peering through the crosshairs at the hidden figure. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense focused. The Japanese sniper was testing him, baiting him, waiting for the first mistake. One misstep, and George would join the 14 men already claimed in the past 72 hours. Time stretched. George counted seconds in his head, each one an eternity. He watched the sniper's breathing, the subtle shift of his rifle, the sway of leaves as he adjusted his aim. The air was thick with tension, the kind that wraps around your chest and makes every breath a struggle. George had never felt more alive, or more vulnerable. He remembered the advice of his marksmanship coach back in Illinois. Patience is victory. Wait for the shot that counts. Slowly. Deliberately, George eased the rifle into position, calibrated the distance, and considered every factor. Wind, humidity, the trajectory, even the smallest leaf in his line of sight. A twig snapped. Soft, almost imperceptible. The sniper flinched, a microsecond's hesitation. George seized it. He exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the bolt-action rifle roared. The recoil sent a sharp jolt through his shoulder, but the shot was true. The Japanese sniper toppled from his hiding spot, eyes wide with shock. Rifle slipping from his grasp for a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the jungle erupted into chaos. The remaining enemy snipers, realizing their comrade had fallen, began repositioning. George didn't pause. He adjusted, calculated, and fired again, taking out another sniper attempting to flank him. The final showdown had become a deadly dance, a test of nerve, skill, and split-second decision-making by the end of the confrontation. George had neutralized the last of the most experienced sniper's attempts to retaliate. His breathing was heavy, sweat clinging to his brow, but the immediate danger was over. The groves of Point Cruz were quiet once more, save for the distant rumble of artillery and the faint calls of patrols regrouping. The men of his unit emerged cautiously, disbelief etched on their faces. "He did it," whispered one. He actually did it. George lowered his rifle, a mix of relief and grim satisfaction washing over him. The ridicule, the doubt, the mocking laughter. They had all been silenced by the undeniable proof of skill and courage. In just 4 days, supposedly toy rifle had become a symbol of deadly precision. 11 Japanese snipers lay dead, and Second Lieutenant John George had cemented his reputation as a ghost of Guadalcanal. A marksman whose patience and nerve had turned the tide for his platoon. The legend had begun. But the story was far from over. The story of John George spread through the 132nd Infantry like wildfire. Men who had laughed at his rifle 6 weeks ago now spoke of him in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the illusion. The mail-order rifle that had seemed a joke had become a weapon of legend, a symbol of skill, patience, and sheer determination. Every patrol returning from the groves whispered the same tale. George moved like a shadow, disappeared into the undergrowth, and struck with deadly precision. Some swore they glimpsed him in one place, only to hear the crack of his rifle from another. Rumors even reached the Japanese lines. Stories of an American sniper who could appear out of nowhere, take a perfect shot, and vanish without a trace, spread among the enemy troops, sowing unease and fear. George himself remained quiet, almost invisible. He didn't seek praise or glory. For him, every kill was calculated, every shot necessary. But he couldn't ignore the subtle shift in how his peers viewed him. The same officers who had mocked him now consulted him on strategy. Young soldiers began shadowing his movements, trying to learn from his patience, his methodical approach to the deadly dance of sniping. Yet, with respect, came expectation and pressure. The enemy was adapting. Japanese snipers, once confident, now became cautious, more elusive. They repositioned constantly, laid traps, and tried to anticipate George's movements. Every engagement became a battle of wits. A chess match where a single miscalculation could be fatal. Night after night, George lay awake, listening to the jungle. The rustle of leaves, the distant gunfire, the calls of unseen creatures, all carried meaning. Each sound could signal a threat or an opportunity. He studied maps, noted positions, and visualized every possible scenario. Preparation became his armor. Vigilance, his companion. The soldiers began to rely on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Patrol leaders sought his advice on which routes were safest, how to anticipate sniper activity, and when to advance or hold position. His actions had transformed not only perceptions, but tactics. A man who had once been dismissed as naive or foolish was now a cornerstone of strategy. A quiet force that bolstered morale and instilled fear in the enemy. Even the mundane became extraordinary. Cleaning his rifle took on ritual-like precision. Observing terrain became a mental map of danger. Patience was no longer just a virtue. It was survival. George's world narrowed to focus. Attention and calculation, but in doing so, he became something greater than a soldier, a symbol of ingenuity and courage under impossible conditions. And yet, the story was far from over. George knew the Japanese would not remain idle forever. Each day brought new challenges. Each encounter demanded more of him than the last. The groves of Point Cruz had become a proving ground. A crucible where only the sharpest eyes, the steadiest hands, and the calmest minds survived. By the time the sun set on the 4th day, whispers had turned into legend. Soldiers spoke of John George not just as a sniper, but as a ghost, an unseen force shaping the battlefield. His rifle, once mocked and dismissed, had become a symbol of possibility. The reminder that skill and courage could turn the tide in ways no one expected. The enemy knew it. His comrades knew it. And John George, quiet and focused, understood it better than anyone. The fight was not over. And every shadow might conceal the next threat, the aftermath of George's four-day campaign against the Japanese snipers was felt immediately across the 132nd Infantry. The men moved with renewed confidence. Where once they had feared the Point Cruz groves, now they advanced with caution tempered by courage, knowing that one man's skill had carved a path through danger. The morale boost was undeniable. Whispers of George's exploits spread from platoon to platoon, emboldening soldiers who had spent weeks in the shadow of death. Commanding officers, initially skeptical, began to recognize the tangible impact of his precision. Patrols were now planned around his capabilities. Units were reassured that any sniper threats could be met with strategy and patience rather than fear. George's actions had turned a previously lethal stretch of jungle, into an arena where tactical advantage could be seized. Yet for George himself, the victory was far from simple triumph. Each kill weighed on him. In the quiet moments, he reflected on the men he had faced, their training, and the inevitability of war's cost. Victory in the Point Cruz groves came at the expense of human lives. And even a seasoned soldier like George could not fully detach from the moral weight of taking them. The psychological toll was subtle but persistent. Nights haunted by the thought of eyes staring from the shadows. Moments of doubt, questions about what distinguished heroism from necessity. Still, recognition came in the form of respect and admiration. Fellow soldiers no longer mocked his rifle. They asked to examine it, marveled at its craftsmanship, and listened closely to his advice. George became a quiet teacher, passing on lessons in patience, observation, and marksmanship to anyone willing to learn. His story became more than a personal victory. It became a blueprint for survival and tactical thinking in jungle warfare. The Japanese, too, had taken note. Patrols became hesitant. Sniper teams repositioned more carefully, and rumors of an American ghost sniper persisted. By removing 11 of their deadliest marksmen in just 4 days, George had not only saved lives, but also shifted enemy tactics. His presence altered the rhythm of battle, creating a psychological advantage for his unit. Yet the most lasting impact was subtle. George had proven that skill, patience, and ingenuity could outweigh brute force and conventional firepower. A man armed with a toy rifle, mocked and underestimated, had changed the dynamic of the battlefield. His actions were a reminder that courage and precision could tip the scales even in a war as vast and chaotic as Guadalcanal, as he cleaned his rifle that evening. George did not feel triumph, nor did he seek it. Instead, he felt the quiet satisfaction of a job executed with focus and care, of lives preserved through discipline and skill, and of a small corner of the world temporarily tamed by a single, determined individual. The legend of the mail-order rifle sniper was no longer a tale. It was reality, a force quietly shaping the war around him. The morning mist hung low over the Point Cruz groves, thick and suffocating, hiding both friend and foe in a veil of gray-green shadows. George moved with the fluid precision of a predator, every step calculated, every breath measured. The previous 4 days had honed his instincts to razor sharpness. He knew the enemy was watching, waiting, repositioning, and that the next encounters could be more lethal than anything he had faced before. His first target appeared suddenly, a flicker of movement among the undergrowth. George froze, aligning the scope carefully. The man was experienced, cautious, but not cautious enough. One controlled shot, and the sniper fell without a sound. George barely registered the kill before scanning for the next threat. There were more. Always more, ours blurred into a tense rhythm of hide-and-seek, patience, and precision. Each enemy sniper he faced was skilled, adapting to his tactics, changing positions unpredictably, sometimes setting ambushes that would have caught a less disciplined marksman. But George's patience was his weapon. He read the signs, broken twigs, the whisper of leaves, the faint reflection of sunlight on a scope, and acted with the decisive speed of a man who had spent years training. Waiting for this exact moment, one sniper, positioned high in a banyan tree, attempted to flank him from the left. George calculated the angle, held his breath, and fired. The sniper collapsed, taken by surprise, but George's advantage lasted only seconds. Another enemy appeared from the opposite side, firing wildly in an attempt to cover their comrade's retreat. George ducked, recalibrated, and picked his next target. Shot after shot, he dismantled the enemy's coordination, turning confusion into opportunity. By midday, George had engaged 6 more snipers in rapid succession. His focus was absolute, his mind a machine of strategy and reaction. Each kill was deliberate, necessary, and executed with flawless precision. He became a ghost in the groves, a force that struck with lethal clarity and vanished before retaliation. The Japanese soldiers began to doubt themselves. Their confidence eroded by the relentless efficiency of one man. Even as fatigue set in, George's discipline did not waver. Sweat dripped from his brow, muscles ached, but every movement was deliberate, every shot exact. He had learned to anticipate enemy behavior, to predict their adjustments, to remain invisible while striking with deadly accuracy. In this crucible of relentless pressure, George's skill and nerve proved unbreakable. By the end of the day, the final sniper of the group attempted a desperate ambush, hiding behind fallen logs, moving silently like a shadow. George observed, waited, and when the moment was right, fired a single, decisive shot. The last sniper fell. The Point Cruz groves were silent again, but the silence was different this time. It was the silence of respect and fear. A battlefield marked by the unmatched precision of one soldier. In just 4 days, George had eliminated 11 snipers, faced the deadliest threats with patience and strategy, and emerged unscathed. His rifle, once mocked as a mere mail-order toy, had proven deadly in the hands of a man who trusted skill over brute force, calm over panic. He had become a living legend, K-name whispered across the regiment and feared by the enemy alike. By the 5th day, the name John George carried weight far beyond his platoon. Soldiers who had once laughed at the mail-order rifle now spoke of him with awe and a hint of fear. Stories of his exploits traveled quickly through the 132nd Infantry. How he had moved like a shadow, struck with deadly precision, and vanished before anyone could react. His reputation was no longer confined to whispers. It had become a tangible force, influencing morale and strategy. The Japanese, too, were aware. Patrols became more cautious, ambushes more calculated. And snipers who had once moved with confidence now questioned every step, every shadow. Rumors of an American ghost sniper spread through their ranks, unsettling seasoned soldiers who had previously felt untouchable. Fear had become an invisible ally for George, shaping the battlefield without him needing to fire a single shot. George himself remained calm, almost invisible amid the chaos. He avoided unnecessary attention, focusing instead on survival, observation, and preparation. Every movement, every action was deliberate. He had learned to read the subtle signs of the jungle, the broken leaves, the faint rustle of distant movement, even the tone of distant voices. These small details became life-saving intelligence. His fellow soldiers began to see him as more than a marksman. He was a strategist, a teacher, and an anchor in a chaotic theater of war. Younger recruits shadowed his movements, eager to learn how to think like him, how to act without being seen, how to strike with deadly efficiency. Even the officers who had once doubted him now relied on his insights for planning patrols and setting defensive positions. But the pressure mounted. Each success carried the weight of expectation. Every time George stepped into the groves, he knew the enemy had adapted. Snipers became cleverer, using feints, decoys, and ambushes designed to catch him off guard. The stakes were higher than ever. One mistake could undo all he had achieved. One moment of miscalculation could mean death. Yet George thrived under the tension. His focus sharpened. His instincts became almost preternatural. He had learned to anticipate enemy behavior, to think several moves ahead, and to use the environment to his advantage. The jungles of Point Cruz had become his domain, a place where skill and patience mattered more than numbers or brute force. The legend of John George, the mail-order rifle sniper, now existed on both sides of the conflict. Soldiers whispered about him in the safety of camp, and enemies adjusted their tactics in fear of him. He had become a symbol that one man, armed with skill, patience, and determination, could alter the course of battle. And yet, he remained unchanged in demeanor, focused, quiet, and relentless, knowing that each day could bring a new challenge, a new threat, and the unending need for vigilance. The groves were alive with tension. Every rustle a potential threat, every shadow a possible adversary. George moved through them with purpose, a living embodiment of patience and lethal precision. The stage was set for the next confrontation, and the world, both friend and foe, waited to see what he would do next. The aftermath of the second series of sniper duels rippled through the 132nd Infantry in ways no one had anticipated. The Point Cruz groves, once feared as a deadly nest of Japanese snipers, were now approached with cautious confidence. George's actions had reshaped the battlefield, creating a tactical advantage that extended beyond his personal skill. Units moved differently, patrols adapted, and even the commander's strategies reflected an understanding of what one disciplined soldier could accomplish. Men who had initially dismissed him as inexperienced now sought his guidance. George's reputation had transformed him into both a symbol and a practical resource. Soldiers followed his methods for observation, concealment, and patient engagement. The lessons he imparted, how to remain calm under fire, how to read the smallest signs of movement, how to make every shot count, came part of the regiment's collective knowledge. His influence extended far beyond the moments in which his rifle spoke. He had taught his comrades to think like a sniper, to anticipate the enemy, and to act with both courage and precision. Yet the psychological toll remained. For every enemy sniper he had eliminated, George carried the weight of what it meant to take a human life. The battlefield demanded efficiency, but efficiency carried consequences. Nights were restless. Even in relative safety, the rustle of leaves or a distant snap could transport him back into the tension of a perfect shot. The eyes of a dying enemy staring up at him. George had become acutely aware of the fine line between heroism and burden, and he bore it with quiet resolve. The Japanese forces, shaken by his relentless effectiveness, altered their tactics. Sniper teams repositioned. Patrols moved more cautiously, and morale began to falter. George's presence on the battlefield was more than physical, it was psychological. Fear became a tool, and the legend of the mail-order rifle sniper became as lethal as the weapon itself. For George, however, recognition was secondary. His focus remained on precision, strategy, and survival. Each engagement demanded full attention, leaving little room for pride. Yet the respect of his peers, the deference of commanding officers, and the caution of the enemy served as confirmation that his skills had altered the course of a small but vital corner of the Pacific theater by the end of the campaign. John George had done more than survive. He had reshaped the dynamic of battle. He had proven that preparation, patience, and ingenuity could outperform brute force, and that a single soldier, armed with skill and determination, could make a profound difference. His legend, now firmly established, was not just about the rifle or the kills. It was about the embodiment of focus, courage, and mastery under pressure. The men of the 132nd Infantry looked to him differently. The enemy respected him quietly. And George, ever the silent professional, understood that while the battle had been won in the groves, the war and the challenges ahead remained in the weeks following the Point Cruz campaign. The legend of John George spread far beyond the groves, where he had faced 11 Japanese snipers. Soldiers told the story in hushed tones around campfires, their voices tinged with awe and disbelief. The mail-order rifle sniper had become more than a man. He was a symbol of skill, patience, and the extraordinary impact one determined individual could have on the course of battle. His exploits had tangible consequences. The 132nd Infantry began moving with renewed confidence through areas that had previously been considered death traps. Patrols were executed with strategic precision, using the techniques George had modeled: careful observation, patience, and calculated action. Where fear had once dictated movement, his example encouraged initiative and vigilance. The enemy, meanwhile, had learned caution the hard way. Japanese forces adjusted their strategies, spreading sniper teams thin, using decoys, and avoiding predictable patterns. George had not only eliminated threats, but forced a change in tactics, proving that psychological influence could be as powerful as bullets. For George, personally, the aftermath was quieter, more introspective. He carried the weight of every life he had taken, and the memory of each kill remained vivid. Nights were restless, filled with the sounds of the jungle and echoes of the battlefield. Though his skill had saved lives, it had also exposed him to the stark realities of combat, the moral and emotional cost of precision in warfare. In moments of reflection, he questioned the line between duty and conscience, heroism and necessity. Yet he accepted that, in war, choices were often defined by survival and effectiveness rather than comfort. Recognition arrived, but it was understated. His commanding officers commended him privately, praising his courage and tactical ingenuity. Fellow soldiers expressed gratitude and respect, but George remained reserved, focusing on the tasks ahead rather than accolades. The rifle, once mocked as a toy, was now treated with reverence, a symbol not only of his marksmanship, but of the patience, discipline, and relentless determination that had made him a legend. Over time, his story became part of the regiment's lore, passed from one generation of soldiers to the next. The lessons learned from George's actions: how to remain calm under pressure, how to anticipate enemy behavior, how a single skilled individual could shape the outcome of deadly encounters, became invaluable guidance for future operations. The legend of the mail-order rifle sniper endured, a testament to ingenuity, courage, and the extraordinary power of focus. Yet, for George himself, the true measure of his impact remained in the lives he had saved, the fear he had instilled in his enemies, and the confidence he had inspired in his comrades. The Point Cruz groves, once a place of terror, had been transformed by one man's determination and skill. The echoes of his actions would linger long after the fighting had moved elsewhere, a permanent reminder of what patience, courage, and precision could achieve in the chaos of war. John George stood in the ruins of the Point Cruz groves, the humid air clinging to his uniform. The rifle in his hands, no longer a toy, but a weapon that had rewritten the rules of engagement. 11 Japanese snipers lay dead, a testament to his skill, patience, and unwavering focus. The men who had once mocked him now regarded him with quiet respect, some even awe, in the chaos of Guadalcanal. A single soldier had altered the course of battle, not through sheer numbers, not through brute force, but through precision, discipline, and courage. The mail-order rifle, saved from storage in Illinois and once derided as a novelty, had proven its worth in the most brutal of theaters. George had become more than a marksman. He had become a symbol of ingenuity, determination, and the extraordinary impact one individual could have amidst the vast machinery of war. Yet, for George, the legend mattered little. He carried no banner, sought no glory. Each kill, each encounter had been a matter of survival, duty, and necessity. Still, history would remember him, not just as a sniper, but as a man who demonstrated the power of focus, courage, and calculated action under the most extreme conditions. The groves grew quiet once more, shadows stretching across the ground where fear had once ruled. The story of the mail-order rifle sniper would live on in the whispers of soldiers. The lessons passed from one unit to the next, and the enemy's memory of a relentless, invisible threat. John George lowered his rifle, took a deep breath, and moved on. The war was far from over, but in those moments, he had proven that even the underestimated, the mocked, and the overlooked could become legends. And sometimes, a single man with determination and skill could change the course of history.